The frozen forest of Western Germany held many secrets in December 1944, but none more deadly than the ones Hauptmann Klaus Weber was trying to understand. His artillery battery sat hidden beneath thick pine branches, covered with camouflage nets that had taken his men 3 hours to position perfectly. Snow had fallen during the night, adding another layer of concealment. No aircraft could spot them. No enemy observer had a line of sight to their position. Yet Weber knew with cold certainty that his guns would be destroyed within hours, just like the 3 batteries he had lost in the past week. The American shells always found them. Weber stood in his command bunker, a simple hole dug into the hillside and reinforced with logs. His maps showed the positions of German forces stretched thin across the Siegfried Line, that great defensive barrier that was supposed to protect the fatherland. The maps also showed red X marks where artillery batteries had been eliminated. Too many red marks. Far too many. Lieutenant Fischer entered the bunker, his young face pale with cold and something else. Fear. Fischer had survived 2 battery destructions already, crawling from the rubble while his comrades died around him. The boy was only 22 years old, but his eyes looked ancient. Herr Hauptmann, the men are asking questions, Fischer said quietly. They followed every concealment procedure. We used smoke. We stayed silent. But the Americans still found Battery 7 yesterday. All 6 guns destroyed in 4 minutes. Weber had no answers. He was a professional soldier, trained in artillery tactics at the finest military schools in Germany. He understood trajectory calculations, ammunition types, and defensive positions. What he could not understand was how American artillery fire arrived with impossible precision, even when his guns were perfectly hidden. Some of the men are talking about ghosts, Fischer continued. They say the Americans have ghost eyes that can see through trees and fog. Weber wanted to dismiss such superstition, but he had no better explanation. In the first years of the war, German artillery had dominated battlefields. Their guns were excellent, their crews well-trained, their tactics superior. But something had changed. The Americans brought some new capability to the Western Front, something that made traditional concealment useless. The radio man interrupted their conversation. Sir, Oberst Kruger on the line. Weber took the handset. His superior's voice crackled with anger and frustration. Weber, I need answers. High Command is demanding explanations. How are the Americans destroying our artillery? Are there traitors? Are they using some new aircraft we cannot see? I do not know, Herr Oberst, Weber admitted. But I intend to find out. I request permission to conduct a test. What kind of test? I will establish multiple dummy positions and one real position. We will use every deception technique available. Smoke generators, false radio traffic, dummy guns made from logs. If there are traitors, they cannot know which position is real. If there are spy aircraft, we will operate in fog. Then we will fire one ranging shot and observe what happens. Kruger was silent for a moment. Approved. But Weber, if you lose another battery without learning something useful, you will be reassigned to the Eastern Front. Do you understand? Weber understood. The Eastern Front meant fighting the Russians, and that was a death sentence for most soldiers. Yes, Herr Oberst. He spent the next day preparing his test. His men constructed 3 elaborate dummy positions, complete with wooden logs carved to resemble gun barrels. They installed smoke generators at all 4 sites. Radio operators broadcast false traffic at the dummy positions. The real battery, his best remaining guns, sat hidden in a valley with overhead cover from tall trees. The weather cooperated. Thick fog rolled across the landscape on the morning of the test, reducing visibility to less than 50 meters. No aircraft could possibly see them. Weber personally checked every detail. Everything was perfect. T-1000 hours. He ordered one gun to fire a single shell toward American lines. Just one shot to see what would happen. The gun crew loaded, elevated the barrel, and fired. The shell whistled away into the fog. Then they waited. 3 minutes passed. Weber began to hope that perhaps the test conditions had finally defeated whatever method the Americans used. Then he heard a sound that made his blood freeze. The whistle of incoming shells. Not just 1 or 2, but dozens. The sound grew louder, closer, unmistakable. "Take cover!" he screamed. The shells fell directly on his real position. Not on the dummy positions, not randomly across the area, but precisely on the one location where his actual guns sat hidden in the fog beneath the trees. The explosions tore through the forest, shredding trees and guns alike. Earth and metal flew through the air. Men screamed. Weber pressed himself into the frozen ground as the world exploded around him. When the bombardment stopped, Weber slowly raised his head. Smoke and dust mixed with the fog. 3 of his 4 guns were destroyed. The 4th was damaged beyond field repair. Around him, his surviving crew members emerged from cover, their faces showing pure terror. Fisher crawled to Weber's side. The young officer's hand shook. "Ow," he whispered. "How did they know? We did everything right. Everything." Weber had no answer. He looked at the destroyed guns, at the terrified men, at the 3 dummy positions that remained untouched by American shells. The Americans had known exactly where his real battery was located. They had ignored his deceptions completely. They had fired through fog that made visual observation impossible. And they had destroyed his position in minutes. For the first time in his military career, Klaus Weber felt something he had never experienced before. Not just fear of death, which every soldier knew, but fear of fighting an enemy he could not understand. An enemy who possessed some capability that made warfare itself unfair. He looked toward the American lines, invisible in the fog. Somewhere beyond that gray curtain, the Americans had technology or methods that rendered traditional artillery tactics obsolete. And Weber's men were dying because of it. "Pack up everything that still works," he ordered quietly. "We retreat to the secondary position." But even as he gave the order, Weber knew the truth. There was no position safe from whatever the Americans were using. The invisible enemy had found them again, and would find them again and again, until his entire command was destroyed. The war was changing in ways no German officer had anticipated. Lieutenant James Morrison pressed his eye against the rubber scope of a device that looked like nothing else on the battlefield. The SCR-584 radar unit hummed quietly in its camouflage truck, hidden 3 miles behind American front lines. Green light glowed on the circular screen before him, and small bright dots appeared whenever German artillery fired. Each dot represented a death sentence for enemy guns. "Contact," Morrison said calmly into his radio handset. "German battery, grid reference 479231. Single gun firing, probably ranging shot." Behind him, Corporal Miguel Rodriguez wrote down the coordinates with practiced speed. They had been doing this for 3 months now, ever since the new equipment arrived from America. The technology was so secret that even most American soldiers had no idea it existed. "Fire mission confirmed," the radio crackled back. 3 battalions, proximity fuse, concentration fire. Time on target, 3 minutes. Morrison allowed himself a small smile. 3 battalions meant 36 heavy guns, all firing at once, all landing at exactly the same moment. The German battery would be gone before they understood what hit them. Just like all the others, Rodriguez looked at his watch. "They never learn, do they, sir? Every time they fire, we get them." "They can't learn," Morrison replied. "They don't know what we're doing. To them, it must seem like magic." Morrison remembered his training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, 6 months earlier. The instructors had gathered the selected officers in a locked room and sworn them to absolute secrecy. What they learned in that room was changing the war. The SCR-584 was a miracle of American engineering. While German scientists had invented radar first, American factories had perfected it and produced thousands of units. The system could detect the flash and blast of enemy guns firing, calculate their exact position within seconds, and relay that information to friendly artillery batteries. What once took hours of observation and calculation now happened faster than a man could run, but the radar was only part of the story. Morrison had also learned about proximity fuses, small radio transmitters built into artillery shells. Traditional shells had to explode at exactly the right moment, which required perfect timing and calculation. The new VT fuses exploded automatically when they sensed they were near a target, creating deadly airbursts that scattered shrapnel over wide areas. German gunners hiding in trenches or behind sandbags found no protection against shells that exploded above them. The combination was devastating. American radar found German guns instantly. American shells with proximity fuses destroyed them with unprecedented efficiency. And the Germans had no idea such technology existed. 30 seconds, Rodriguez announced. Morrison thought about the German soldiers at that grid reference. They were probably feeling safe, hidden in their forest position, convinced that fog and camouflage would protect them. They had no way of knowing that their single ranging shot had painted a target on their location that American technology could see as clearly as if they were standing in bright sunlight. The sound of outgoing American artillery rumbled across the landscape. Morrison could not see the shells arcing through the sky, but he knew what was happening. Dozens of 105mm and 155mm rounds were flying toward that German battery right now. In seconds, they would arrive all at once. Their proximity fuses triggering airbursts that would shred everything below 0.3 miles away. The horizon flashed with orange explosions. Even at this distance, Morrison heard the thunder of the bombardment. It lasted only 30 seconds, but 30 seconds of concentrated modern artillery fire was more destructive than anything previous wars had seen. Target destroyed, came the confirmation over the radio. Observation post reports no return fire. Grid is silent. Another German battery eliminated. Morrison marked it on his map. That made 17 batteries his team had helped destroy this month. Across the entire Western Front, hundreds of German artillery positions were being systematically eliminated by the new American capability. Captain Henry Brooks entered the radar truck, carrying a thermos of hot coffee. Brooks was Morrison's commanding officer, a former engineer who understood the technology better than anyone. He looked at Morrison's map with satisfaction. Good work. High Command wants us to know that German artillery effectiveness has dropped 70% in our sector. Our counter-battery program is exceeding all expectations. Do the Germans know what we're using yet? Rodriguez asked. Brooks shook his head. Intelligence reports they're completely baffled. They've blamed traitors, spy aircraft, even supernatural forces. Some German units are surrendering rather than serve in artillery batteries because they think we can target them personally. Morrison felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in American ingenuity, certainly. The scientists and engineers who developed this technology had saved countless American lives. Every German battery they destroyed meant fewer shells falling on American infantry. But he also felt something like pity for enemy soldiers facing a threat they could not comprehend or defend against. Sir, is it true we're also using sound ranging? Morrison asked. Yes, Brooks confirmed. We have microphone arrays that can detect the sound of German guns and triangulate their positions. We also use flash ranging, with observation posts coordinating to calculate positions from muzzle flashes. But the radar is the real breakthrough. It works in any weather, day or night, and it's accurate to within 50 meters. Rodriguez whistled softly. No wonder they're terrified. The entire system works together, Brooks continued. Radar, sound ranging, flash ranging, aerial observation when weather permits, all feeding into centralized fire direction centers. We can coordinate the fire of multiple battalions to hit one target simultaneously. The Germans are still fighting like it's World War I. We're fighting a different war entirely. Morrison looked at his radar screen, where the green line swept around in an endless circle, watching for the next German mistake. Every time an enemy gun fired, it revealed its position. And once revealed, that position would be destroyed within minutes. How long before they figure it out? Morrison wondered aloud. Brooks considered the question. Does it matter? Even if they learn about the radar, they can't build enough units to match us. Even if they develop proximity fuses, their industry can't produce them in quantity. The war is being decided not just by soldiers with rifles, but by factories in Detroit and laboratories in Washington. And America has more factories than anyone. The radar screen remained empty. Somewhere out there, German artillery commanders were learning the hard way that traditional tactics no longer worked. They were dying confused and terrified, unable to fight an enemy they could not see or understand. Morrison keyed his radio. All stations, this is Radar 6. Maintain watch. Next contact receives immediate fire mission. The war was indeed changing, and America's invisible advantage was destroying German artillery one battery at a time. The January snow fell softly on the abandoned American forward position, covering the frozen blood and scattered equipment. Hauptmann Klaus Weber stepped carefully through the foxholes, his men searching desperately for answers. They had overrun this observation post in a sudden night attack, one of the few German successes in recent weeks. 3 American soldiers lay dead in the snow. One wounded American sat propped against a shattered tree, watching Weber with calm eyes despite his injuries. "Search everything," Weber ordered his men. "I want every piece of equipment examined. Every paper, every device, every scrap of information." His soldiers moved through the position, gathering radios, maps, binoculars, and personal items. Weber studied each object carefully, hoping to find the secret weapon he knew must exist. But the equipment looked ordinary. Standard American field radios. Paper maps marked with conventional military symbols. Nothing that could explain the impossible accuracy of American artillery. Lieutenant Fisher brought over a captured radio and several documents. "Sir, these are just normal forward observer materials. Radio call signs, map coordinates, standard fire mission procedures. Nothing unusual." Weber felt frustration rising in his chest. There must be something. They cannot destroy our batteries with ordinary equipment. It is impossible. The wounded American soldier spoke in accented but clear German. "You will not find what you are looking for here." Weber turned to him. "Then tell me, how do your artillery find our positions so quickly?" The American private shook his head. "I do not know. I call coordinates, and the shells arrive. That is all I know." "You are lying," Fisher said angrily. But Weber studied the soldier's face and saw only truth. This man genuinely knew nothing about radar or advanced technology. He was a simple forward observer who radioed coordinates and watched shells fall. The actual secret was somewhere else, beyond this foxhole, beyond the knowledge of ordinary soldiers. Weber had interrogated other captured Americans with the same result. None of them knew why their artillery was so effective. They simply followed procedures and watched their enemies die. The technology that made it all work remained hidden somewhere in the rear areas, operated by specialists who never came near the front lines. "Sir," one of Weber's sergeants called out, "we found something strange." The sergeant showed Weber several artillery shell fragments, pieces of metal that had been recovered near destroyed German positions. "Look at these, sir. They have small devices attached, some kind of mechanism we have never seen before." Weber examined the fragments closely. The devices were clearly some kind of fuse, but not like any fuse he had seen. Traditional artillery fuses were simple mechanical or timed devices. These had what looked like tiny radio components. But what purpose would a radio serve in an artillery fuse? He had no answer, and his scientists in the rear were equally baffled when he sent them the fragments. The pieces of the puzzle existed, but Weber could not see the complete picture. American artillery was too accurate. American shells were too effective, and German guns were being systematically eliminated. Back at his headquarters that evening, Weber received orders from Oberst Kruger. German intelligence had analyzed the pattern of American counter-battery fire and concluded that the Americans must be using mobility to exploit some weakness. If German guns stayed in one position, they were destroyed. Therefore, German artillery must fire and immediately relocate, a tactic called shoot and scoot. "You will implement mobile artillery tactics," Kruger's written orders stated. "Fire no more than 3 shots from any position, then immediately displace to a new location. This will prevent the Americans from targeting your guns effectively." Weber wanted to argue that mobility would not help against whatever the Americans were using, but orders were orders. He spent 2 days preparing his remaining batteries for rapid displacement. They practiced firing, limbering their guns, and moving to new positions as quickly as possible. His men worked hard, determined to finally defeat the mysterious American capability that on the 3rd day, Weber launched his mobile artillery operation. For batteries positioned at different locations would fire in sequence, each gun shooting 3 rounds before moving. The plan was to hit American positions and relocate before return fire arrived. Battery 1 fired first, 3 quick shots. Then the crews frantically began hooking guns to their towing vehicles. They had 90 seconds before the first truck moved. It was not enough time. American shells arrived while the guns were still being connected to their vehicles. The radar had detected the first muzzle flash, calculated the position instantly, and directed overwhelming counter-battery fire to that exact location. The battery was destroyed before it could move even 100 meters. Battery 2 fired from a different location, saw what happened to Battery 1, and tried to move even faster. The result was the same. American shells found them before they could escape. Battery 3 and 4 never fired at all. Their commanders, watching the destruction of the first 2 batteries, ordered immediate retreat without firing a single shot. Weber stood in his command post, listening to the disaster unfold over the radio. His mobile tactics had failed completely. The Americans did not need time to calculate positions or coordinate fire. They responded almost instantly, faster than any human calculation could explain. Lieutenant Fisher entered, his face showing the same despair that Weber felt. "Sir, we have lost more than half our remaining guns. The men are refusing orders." Several crews abandoned their weapons and fled. For the first time, Weber understood that he was not just losing battles. He was watching the complete destruction of German artillery capability in his sector. The Americans possessed technology so superior that traditional military tactics meant nothing. Courage meant nothing. Training meant nothing. Against an enemy who could detect and destroy any artillery position within minutes, there was no defense. "Sir, what do we do?" Fisher asked quietly. Weber looked at his maps, at the few remaining red marks indicating German artillery positions. Soon those marks would all be crossed out, eliminated, destroyed by an enemy they could not see, could not understand, could not defeat. "We survive, Lieutenant," Weber said finally. "We survive as long as we can, and we protect our infantry. But the artillery war is lost. The Americans have already won." That night, Weber wrote a detailed report to German High Command, explaining everything he had observed. The impossible accuracy, the rapid response times, the effectiveness even in poor weather, the strange fuses on American shells. He recommended that Germany either develop similar technology immediately or withdraw artillery from the Western Front entirely before every battery was destroyed. His report was received and filed. Nothing changed. German artillery continued to die, one battery at a time, confused and terrified, fighting an enemy they would never understand. The roads of Western Germany were clogged with retreating soldiers in February 1945. Hauptmann Klaus Weber led what remained of his artillery battery through the frozen landscape, heading east toward the Rhine River. Behind them, American forces advanced steadily, their artillery reaching out to strike German positions with devastating accuracy. Ahead lay only more retreat, more defeat, more death. Weber had 4 guns left. 4 guns from the battery that once had 16. The faces of his dead crews haunted him during every quiet moment. Young men who had trusted him to lead them, who had followed his orders, who had died without understanding why their defenses failed. Lieutenant Fisher rode beside Weber in the command vehicle, silent and hollow-eyed. The young officer had aged 10 years and 2 months. He no longer spoke of victory or duty. He simply obeyed orders and waited for death. "Herr Hauptmann," the radio operator called out. "Command orders us to establish defensive position at grid reference 824557. We are to provide covering fire for the 352nd Infantry Division's withdrawal." Weber looked at his map. The position was a small hill with good fields of fire toward the American advance. In normal warfare, it would be an excellent artillery position. In this new kind of war, it was a death trap. His guns would be detected within minutes of firing, and American counter-battery fire would destroy them. But orders were orders. German infantry needed covering fire to escape the American advance. Weber's remaining gunners were the only artillery available. If they did not fire, hundreds of German soldiers would be caught in the open and slaughtered. "Acknowledge the order," Weber told his radio man. "We move to the position immediately." Fisher looked at him with understanding and sadness. They both knew what this mission meant. It was a death sentence disguised as orders. They reached the position at dusk. Weber's crews worked quickly to prepare the guns, but their movements lacked the enthusiasm of earlier months. These men knew they were preparing their own graves. Some of them shook with fear as they handled ammunition. Others worked with the calm acceptance of soldiers who had surrendered hope. Weber remembered the beginning of the war, when his battery was full of proud young men who believed in German superiority. They had trained together, laughed together, celebrated victories together. Now most of them were dead, killed by an enemy they never saw and could not fight. "Sir," Fisher said quietly, "if we fire, we will die? The Americans will destroy us just like they destroyed all the others." "I know," Weber replied. "But if we do not fire, our infantry will die. That is not acceptable." "Is anything acceptable anymore?" Fisher asked bitterly. "We cannot win. Our technology is inferior. Our tactics are obsolete. We are sending men to certain death for a war that is already lost." Weber had no answer. Everything Fisher said was true. But Weber was a soldier, and soldiers followed orders even when those orders led to death. The infantry began their retreat at dawn. Thousands of exhausted German soldiers moved across the open ground, carrying wounded comrades and what little equipment they had saved. American forces pressed behind them, tanks and trucks advancing steadily. If artillery did not slow the American advance, the retreating infantry would be caught and destroyed. "Prepare to fire," Weber ordered. His 4 remaining guns elevated their barrels. Loaders slammed shells into breeches. Gunners made final adjustments. Weber looked at the faces of his crews, memorizing them, honoring them in his mind. These men were about to sacrifice themselves for comrades they had never met. "Fire!" The guns roared, sending shells toward American positions. One shot each, carefully aimed to land among the advancing American forces. The shells would not stop the advance, but they might slow it, might give the retreating infantry precious minutes to escape. Weber counted in his head. Based on his experience, American counter-battery fire would arrive in approximately 3 minutes. His guns could fire perhaps 6 more shells before the end came. He gave the order for rapid fire, trying to provide maximum support before death arrived. The guns fired again and again. Shells whistled away toward American lines. Weber's crews worked with desperate speed, loading and firing, knowing each shot might be their last. Lieutenant Morrison, 3 miles away in his radar truck, watched the German battery appear on his screen. He felt a moment of hesitation. The German fire was clearly covering a retreat. These gunners were sacrificing themselves to save their comrades. There was something honorable in that, even if they were enemies, but war allowed no sentiment. Morrison called in the fire mission, and 36 American guns responded instantly. Shells arced through the morning sky, their proximity fuses armed and ready. Weber was directing his 4th volley when he heard the sound. That terrible whistling that meant death was falling from the sky. He looked at Fisher, at his brave crews still working their guns, and felt overwhelming sadness. "Take cover," he shouted, though he knew it was useless. The American barrage arrived with apocalyptic fury. Proximity fuses detonated shells 20 feet above ground, creating airbursts that sprayed deadly shrapnel in all directions. The 4 guns were hit simultaneously, torn apart by concentrated fire. Men died at their posts, killed instantly by the storm of metal. Weber was thrown to the ground by a blast. He felt pain in his side and tasted blood. Through ringing ears, he heard screaming. Not all of his men had died instantly. Some were wounded, crying for help that would not come. That he tried to stand, but his legs would not work. He lay in the frozen mud, watching smoke rise from destroyed guns. 20 meters away, Fisher lay motionless, half his body torn away by shrapnel. The young lieutenant's eyes stared at the sky, seeing nothing. American shells continued to fall, ensuring complete destruction. It was thorough, efficient, merciless. Modern warfare in its purest form. Weber thought about the infantry they had tried to save. Had their sacrifice bought enough time? He would never know. His vision began to fade. Cold seeped into his body. He thought about his home in Bavaria, about the peaceful life before the war, about all the young men who had trusted him and died as darkness closed in. Weber's last thought was not of tactics or technology, but of waste. What a terrible waste of young lives, lost to a war decided by machines and science rather than courage and honor. Hauptmann Klaus Weber survived. The shrapnel wound in his side had looked worse than it actually was, and American medics had treated him with surprising care after finding him unconscious among the ruins of his battery. Now, in May 1945, he sat in a prisoner of war camp in Belgium. The war finally over, Germany defeated. The camp held thousands of German officers, men who had fought for years and now waited to learn their fate. Some were bitter. Others were relieved the fighting had ended. All of them struggled to understand how Germany, which had seemed so powerful in 1939, had been completely crushed by 1945. That on a warm spring afternoon, an American intelligence officer entered the camp and requested to speak with artillery commanders. Weber was among the dozen German officers brought to a simple wooden building that served as the camp headquarters. The American officer was young, a major with kind eyes and careful German. He introduced himself as Major Patterson, formerly of the 3rd Army Artillery Command. He carried a large case that he set on the table before the assembled German officers. "Gentlemen," Patterson began, "the war is over. Many secrets no longer need to be secrets. Your government has surrendered unconditionally, and we believe you deserve to understand how you were defeated. Specifically, you artillery officers deserve to know why your batteries were destroyed with such efficiency." Weber leaned forward, his heart racing. After months of confusion and death, he was finally going to learn the truth. Patterson opened his case and removed several devices. He placed them on the table where the German officers could see. "This," he said, holding up a complex electronic unit, "is the SCR-584 radar system. It can detect the flash and blast from your gun's firing, calculate the exact position instantly, and relay that information to our artillery within seconds." The room fell silent. Radar. Of course. Weber felt foolish for not guessing, but also relieved. It was not traitors or supernatural forces. It was simply technology. But radar alone does not explain everything. Patterson continued. "We also use sound ranging with microphone arrays that could triangulate your positions from the sound of your guns. We used flash ranging with coordinated observation posts. We used aerial reconnaissance when weather permitted. All of these systems fed information into centralized fire direction centers that could coordinate multiple battalions to fire simultaneously on one target." He held up a shell with a strange fuse. "And this is the VT proximity fuse, a miniature radio transmitter in the nose of the shell that detonates the warhead when it senses it is near a target. Your gunners could hide in trenches or behind cover, but our shells exploded in the air above them, raining shrapnel down from overhead." One German colonel spoke up. "But how could you produce such technology in quantity? These devices must be complex and expensive." Patterson smiled slightly. "American factories, Colonel. While your industry was being bombed and running out of raw materials, American factories were producing these systems by the thousands. We built more than 10,000 SCR-584 units. We manufactured over 20 million proximity fuses. Our industrial capacity was simply greater than yours." Weber thought about all the young men who had died in his battery. They had not failed because of cowardice or poor training. They had died because they were fighting with equipment designed for the previous war, while their enemies used technology that rendered traditional tactics obsolete. "Did any of our batteries survive?" asked another German officer. "Some," Patterson admitted. "Your artillery that stayed silent, that never fired, survived. But of course, silent artillery cannot support infantry. The batteries that fought, that did their duty, were systematically eliminated. We estimate we destroyed over 70% of German artillery on the Western Front in the final 6 months of the war." The number stunned Weber. 70%. Thousands of guns. Tens of thousands of men. All eliminated by technology they could not see and did not understand. "Why are you telling us this?" Weber asked. Patterson looked at him directly. "Because you fought as soldiers doing your duty. You deserve to know that your defeat was not due to cowardice or incompetence. You were simply facing technology you could not match. Also, we want you to understand something important. The nature of warfare has changed forever. Technology now matters as much as courage. Industrial capacity matters as much as training. The next war, if there is one, will be decided by scientists and factories as much as by soldiers." After the briefing, as the German officers filed out, Patterson called to Weber specifically. "Hauptmann Weber? A moment, please." Weber stopped, curious. "I wanted to meet you personally," Patterson said. "We captured your reports to German High Command. Your observations were remarkably accurate. You understood that you faced a technological disadvantage even when you did not know the specific technologies involved. My understanding did not save my men," Weber said bitterly. "No," Patterson agreed. "But it shows you are a professional soldier who thinks clearly even under terrible circumstances. That deserves respect, even between enemies. He handed Weber a folder. These are some documents about the American counterbattery program. Technical details, statistics, photographs of the equipment. You cannot take them from this room, but I thought you might like to read them, to finally see the complete picture. Weber spent 2 hours reading those documents. He learned about Lieutenant Morrison and other radar operators. He read statistics showing how American artillery effectiveness had increased 500% compared to World War I. He saw photographs of the SCR 584 radar units and proximity fuses. He studied diagrams showing how multiple detection systems work together to create an integrated counterbattery network. Finally, he understood. The mystery that had tormented him for months was simply American engineering and industrial power applied to military problems. No magic, no traitors, just science and mass production. That evening, Weber sat in the camp yard watching the sunset. He thought about the men he had lost, about young Fisher who had died beside his gun, about all the brave soldiers who had fought against impossible odds. War had changed. The courage of individual soldiers mattered less than the technology they carried. The next generation would fight with computers and guided missiles and weapons Weber could not imagine. Future soldiers would need to be technicians as much as warriors. But one thing had not changed. Men still died in wars. Young men still followed orders and sacrificed themselves for causes they believed in. Technology made killing more efficient, but it did not make death any less tragic. Weber pulled out a piece of paper and began writing letters to the families of his dead crew members. He wanted them to know how their sons and husbands had died, not from cowardice or failure, but from facing an enemy with technology they could not match. There was honor in that, even in defeat. The sun set over the prisoner of war camp, ending another day of peace in a world that had finally stopped fighting. Weber continued writing as darkness fell, honoring the dead in the only way remaining to him.